We continue with Pavir Velikonsky. At the word vodka, the theologian spat to one side and observed, "Sure, there's no point staying in the fields." The students went on, and to their greatest joy fancied they heard a distant barking. Figuring out the direction, they listened, set off more cheerfully, and, after going a little further, saw a light. "A farmstead, by God, a farmstead," said the philosopher. His anticipation did not disappoint him. In a short while they indeed saw a small farmstead that consisted of just 2 cottages sharing the same yard. There was light in the windows, a dozen plum trees stuck up by the paling. Peeking through cracks in the boards of the gates, the student saw a yard filled with ox carts. Just then stars appeared here and there in the sky. "Watch out, brothers, don't hang back. We must get a night's lodging at all costs." The 3 learned men knocked at the gate with one accord and shouted, "Open up!" The door of one cottage creaked, and a minute later the students saw before them an old woman in a sheepskin coat. "Who's there?" she cried with a muffled cough. "Let us in for the night, Granny. We've lost our way. It's as bad out in the fields as it is in our hungry belly." "And what sort of folk are you?" "We're harmless folk," the theologian Kalyava, the philosopher Brute, and the rhetorician Gorobets. "Can't do it," the old woman grumbled. "I've got a yard full of people, and every corner of the cottage is taken. Where will I put you? And such big and hefty folk at that? My cottage will fall apart if I take in the likes of you. I know these philosophers and theologians. Once you start taking in those drunkards, there soon won't be any house. Away, away with you. There's no room for you here. Have mercy, Granny. Can it be that the Christian souls must perish for no reason at all? Put us up wherever you like, and if we somehow do something or other, let our arms wither, and whatever else God only knows. There." The old woman seemed to soften a little. "Very well," she said, as if considering. "I'll let you in, only I'll make you all sleep in different places, for my heart won't be at peace if you lie together." "That's as you will. We won't object," replied the students. The gates creaked, and they went into the yard. "Well, Granny," said the philosopher, following the old woman, "and what if, as they say, by God, it's as if wheels are turning in my stomach. We haven't had a sliver in our mouths since morning." "See what he's after," the old woman said. "I've got nothing like that, and I didn't start the stove all day." "And tomorrow," the philosopher went on, "we'll pay for it all, well and good, in cash. Yes," he went on softly, the devil of a cent you'll get. Go on, and be content with what you've got. Such tender young sirs the devil's brought us." The philosopher Coma became utterly despondent at these words, but suddenly his nose caught the scent of dried fish. He glanced at the trousers of the theologian walking beside him and saw an enormous fishtail sticking out of his pocket. The theologian had already managed to snatch a whole carp off a wagon. And since he had done it not for any profit, but simply from habit, and having forgotten his carp completely, was looking around for something else to filch. Not intending to overlook even a broken wheel, the philosopher Coma put his hand into his pocket, as if it were his very own, and pulled out the carp. The old woman got the students installed, the rhetorician was put in the cottage, the theologian was shut up in an empty closet. The philosopher was assigned to the sheep pen, also empty. The philosopher, left alone, ate the carp in 1 minute, examined the wattled sides of the pen, shoved his foot into the curious snout that a pig had poked through from the next pen, and rolled over on his other side in order to fall into a dead sleep. Suddenly the low door opened, and the old woman, stooping down, came into the pen. "Well, Granny, what do you want?" said the philosopher. But the old woman came toward him with outspread arms. "Oh-ho," thought the philosopher. "Only no, dearie, you're obsolete." He moved slightly further off, but again the old woman unceremoniously came toward him. "Listen, Granny," said the philosopher. "It's a fast period, and I'm the sort of man who won't break his fast even for 1,000 gold rubles." But the old woman kept spreading her arms and grasping for him without saying a word. The philosopher became frightened, especially when he noticed that her eyes flashed with some extraordinary light. "Granny, what is it? Go with God," he cried. But the old woman did not say a word and kept grabbing for him with her arms. He jumped to his feet, intending to flee, but the old woman stood in the doorway, fixing her flashing eyes on him, and again began to come toward him. The philosopher wanted to push her away with his hands, but noticed to his astonishment that his arms would not rise, nor would his legs move. With horror, he discovered that the sound of his voice would not even come from his mouth. The words stirred soundlessly on his lips. He heard only how his own heart was beating. He saw how the old woman came up to him, folded his arms, bent his neck, jumped with cat-like quickness onto his back, struck him on the side with a broom, and he, leaping like a saddle horse, carried her on his back. All this happened so quickly that the philosopher barely managed to recover his senses and seize both his knees with his hands in an effort to stop his legs. But to his great amazement, it kept moving against his will and performed leaps quicker than a Circassian racer. When they passed the farmstead and a smooth hollow opened out before them, and the coal-black forest spread out to one side, only then did he say to himself, "Oh, this is a witch." This next paragraph I apparently already put notes to, and the note that I put in the margin says, "Gogol a go-go," so this should be a very good next paragraph, descriptive paragraph. A reverse crescent moon shone in the sky. The timid midnight radiance lay lightly as a transparent blanket and steamed over the earth. Forest, meadows, sky, valleys all seemed to be sleeping with open eyes. Not a flutter of wind anywhere. There was something damply warm in the night's freshness. The shadows of trees and bushes, like comets, fell in sharp wedges over the sloping plain. Such was the night when the philosopher Como Brute galloped with an incomprehensible rider on his back. He felt some languid, unpleasant, and at the same time sweet feeling coming into his heart. He lowered his head and saw that the grass, which was almost under his feet, seemed to be growing deep and distant, and that over it was water as transparent as a mountain spring, and the grass seemed to be at the deep bottom of some bright, transparent sea. At least he clearly saw his own reflection in it, together with the old woman sitting on his back. He saw some sun shining there instead of the moon. He heard bluebells tinkle, bending their heads. He saw a water nymph swim from behind the sedge. Her back and leg flashed, round, lithe, made all of a shining and quivering. She turned toward him, and her face, with its light, sharp, shining eyes, with its soul-invading song, now approached him, was already at the surface, then, shaking with sparkling laughter, withdrew. And then she turned over on her back, and the sun shone through her nebulous breasts, matte as unglazed porcelain, at the edges of their white, tenderly elastic roundness. Water covered them in tiny bubbles like beads. She trembles all over and laughs in the water. Is he seeing it? Or is he not? Is he awake? Or asleep? But what now? Wind or music? Ringing, ringing, and whirling, and approaching, and piercing the soul with some unbearable trill. I thought I'd take a critical break and read from Simon Karlinski's The Sexual Labyrinth of Nikolai Gogol, what he wrote about the short story Viy. The exact time when the first version of Taras Bulba was written is not known. Since Viy was written shortly before the publication of Murgorod, one might assume that it was the last story of the cycle to be written. This would make sense because it is in this story that the sexual themes treated in the other three come into their sharpest focus. In no other work did Gogol confront sexuality so openly and in so many of its aspects. The personal and unconventional elements are so numerous that he must have thought it best to cover his tracks with a footnote that reads, quote, Viy is a colossal creation of the popular imagination. This is the name the Ukrainians use for the ruler of the gnomes, whose eyelids reach down to the ground. The entire story is a folk legend. I did not want to alter it in any respect, and am setting it down in the simple form in which I heard it. End of quote. Actually, apart from some very general motifs about witchcraft and possession by witches, there is very little folklore in Viy. The gnomes, as Leon Stillman, among others, has pointed out, do not occur in Ukrainian or any other Slavic mythology. They are Germanic and were made popular in the Romantic Age by the fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm. The early portion of the story is quite realistic, while its last portion has a clear literary model and antecedent. Robert Southey's ballad, quote, The Old Woman of Berkeley, end of quote, which Gogol knew in a fine Russian adaptation by Zhukovsky. The mythology of Viy is not that of the Ukrainian people, but that of Nikolai Gogol's subconscious. Like much of Taras Bulba, the beginning of Viy is a reflection of Gogol's nostalgia for the happy male camaraderie of the boarding school at Nezhin. The 6 years that elapsed between the time of his departure from the school and the time he wrote Mirgorod covered that period with a patina which concealed the occasional rejections and unpopularity that he suffered in Nezhin. What remained in his memory was the warm and affectionate circle of male friends, which he came to miss badly in St. Petersburg, and which he recreated in an altered and slightly disguised form in Taras Bulba and in the opening pages of Viy. The all-male world of Viy is that of a religious seminary in Kiev. With humor and gentle irony, Gogol evokes the seminarians' day-to-day existence, their lusty ways, their convivial outings in the country, their school theatricals, and their genial pleasure in sharing each other's company. Corporal punishment at school is part of the normal routine. Fist fights, either on a one-to-one basis or in two opposing groups, are one of the accepted modes of entertainment. The boys are divided into 4 categories in accordance with their age and the degree of advancement in their studies. The youngest are called grammarians, then come the rhetoricians, the still older philosophers, and finally, the almost entirely adult theologians. The division is comparable to the classification of American college students into freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, a point that is missed in such English translations of Viy as the one found in the Constance Garnett Leonard J. Kent volume, where these appellations are assumed to refer to the students' majors or preferred subjects. After an overall panorama of student life, Gogol zeroes in on 3 particular seminarians who become lost in the fields during an outing in the country. I want to highlight that the division is comparable to the classification of American college students into freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors, a point that is missed in such English translations of Viy as the one found in the Constance Garnett Leonard J. Kent volume, where these appellations are assumed to refer to the students' majors or preferred subjects. After an overall panorama of student life, Gogol zeroes in on 3 particular seminarians who become lost in the fields during an outing in the country. The eldest bears the inelegant name of halyava, meaning top part of a boot. The Ukrainian idiomatic saying, quote, to jump higher than the top of your boots, end of quote, means to get into bad trouble. The other 2 have pseudo-Roman names, Latin being traditionally associated with divinity schools, Homa Brute, Thomas Brutus, and Tiberi Horobets, Tiberius Sparrow. Homa Brute, the hero of Viy, might well be the most full-blooded, sensible, and psychologically healthy of Gogol's protagonists. A lazy southerner, he manages to be pragmatic, resourceful, and courageous without any false heroics while he's being stalked by assorted monsters. Homa is on occasion naively opportunistic, he loves drink and women, and he is not above a little petty larceny or selling his sexual favors to affluent market women or bakers' wives. An altogether likable young man, in short, and far better company than Taras Bulba's compulsive, murderous sons. F.C. Dreisen has perceptively observed that the action in Viy alternates regularly between day and night, the daylight scenes being cheerful, sociable, and logical, and the nocturnal ones terrifying and irrational. As night falls around the 3 students lost in the fields, the faint, distant howling of a wolf is heard. This howling recurs periodically in the story, gradually increasing in volume. Its significance is finally revealed when it ushers in the appearance of Viy himself at the end. Eventually, the students make their way to a secluded farm and talk the innocuous-seeming old woman they find there into allowing them to spend the night. The woman lets them in, but on the condition that they sleep in separate places. That is, she does what women do in all other stories in Mirgorod. She separates the men from their male companions. Her rationale is quite explicit. My heart will not be at peace if all of you are lying together. The usual English translation of this phrase, my mind won't be at rest if you are all together, misses an important point. Separated from his friends, Homa Brute is offered a sheep sty as his place of lodging. Sheep, like horses and dogs, are among Gogol's safe and friendly animals, not tainted with any dreaded sexual associations. As Homa is getting settled for the night, however, an inquisitive pig pokes its head in from a neighboring sty. Homa, who has not read Gogol, sees nothing ominous in this. He kicks the pig in the snout and turns over on his other side to go to sleep. But a reader who is familiar with the ferret Sorochinsky and the 2 Ivans knows that the pig's appearance indicates that sex and violence cannot be far away. And indeed, the door opens, the old woman comes in. and approaches Homo with outspread arms. He instantly perceives her intentions to be sexual. Quote, "So that's it," thought the philosopher. "But no, my sweet, you're too old." He moved away slightly, but the old woman unceremoniously approached him again. "Listen, Granny," said the philosopher. "It is a fast time now, and I am the kind of person who would not break a fast for 1,000 gold pieces." But the woman opened her arms and tried to catch him without saying a word. I'm now going to go back to the story, and I'm going to read the Christopher English translation, and then I'm going to read the Constance Garnett just for fun. The crescent of the moon shone in the sky. The timid glow of the midnight sky rested lightly over the earth like a lacy coverlet. The forests, meadows, valleys, even the sky itself, all appeared to be asleep with their eyes open. There was not so much as a breath of wind. The fresh night air was at once warm and moist. The shadows of the trees and bushes fell in long streaks like comet tails across the gently sloping plain. Such was the night through which the philosopher Coma Brute galloped with the strange rider on his back. A strange oppression, a feeling at once sweet and sickening, entered his heart. He lowered his head and saw that the grass, which was almost brushing against his feet, seemed to grow far beneath him, deep under water, as limpid as a mountain stream, so that it seemed to grow on the bottom of a crystal clear sea. In it he could clearly see his reflection with the witch sitting on his back. He saw that some kind of sun shone in place of the moon. He heard the bluebells bend their heads and tinkle. He saw a water nymph swim out from behind the sedge, saw her back and leg flash before his eyes, and observed that she was made of pure, trembling brilliance. She turned to him, and he beheld her face with keen, sparkling eyes, which thrilled the soul with song, and this face came gradually closer to him, reached the surface, and with a sparkling cascade of laughter swam away. Then he saw her again lying on her back, and her cloud-white breasts as matte as unglazed porcelain. I'm really fascinated by that matte because I recently encountered that Nabokov in the book Ardor, describing a girl's skin as matte white. And I'm wondering if he got it from here, because I've heard of matte black. I've never heard of matte white. And I'm wondering if it's a Russian concept, because I've just never heard it before. Then he saw her again lying on her back, and her cloud-white breasts, as matte as unglazed porcelain, gleamed in the sunlight along the edges of their white, softly elastic circumference. Small pearl-like beads of water were scattered over them. The nymph trembled her whole body and laughed in the water. Was he really seeing this? Was it reality or a dream? But what was that? The wind or music? A ringing, swirling noise coming closer and searing his soul with its unbearable shrillness? Now I'm going to read the Constance Garnett, because I do love that passage, and I want to see if she says matte. I bet she doesn't say matte. I see that in this one as well, I have put a mark in the margin that this is a passage that I enjoyed, and this is probably the first translation that I read, probably back in around 90, 94, 95. The waning crescent of the moon was shining in the sky. The timid radiance of midnight lay mistily over the earth, light as a transparent veil. The forests, the meadows, the sky, the dales, all seemed as though slumbering with open eyes. Not a breeze fluttered anywhere. There was a damp warmth in the freshness of the night. The shadows of the trees and bushes fell on the sloping plain in pointed wedge shapes like comets. Such was the night when Coma Brute, the philosopher, set off galloping with a mysterious rider on his back. He was aware of an exhausting, unpleasant, and at the same time voluptuous sensation assailing his heart. He bent his head and saw that the grass, which had been almost under his feet, seemed growing far below him, and that above it there lay water, transparent as a mountain stream, and the grass seemed to be at the bottom of a clear sea, limpid to its very depths. Anyway, he saw clearly in it his own reflection with the old woman sitting on his back. He saw shining there a sun instead of the moon. He heard the bluebells ringing as they bent their little heads. He saw a water sprite float out from behind the reeds. There was the gleam of her leg and back, rounded and firm, all brightness and shimmering. She turned toward him, and now her face came nearer, with eyes clear, sparkling, keen, with singing that pierced the heart. Now it was on the surface, and shaking with sparkling laughter, it moved away. And now she turned on her back, and her cloud-like breasts, dead white like unglazed china. Told you she wasn't going to say matte. Dead white like unglazed china. Gleamed in the sun at the edges of their white, soft, and supple roundness. Little bubbles of water like beads bedewed them. She was all quivering and laughing in the water. Did he see this or did he not? Was he awake or dreaming? But what was that? The wind or music? It was ringing and reverberating and coming closer and piercing his heart with an insufferable thrill. What does it mean? The philosopher wondered, looking down as he flew along full speed. The sweat was streaming from him. He was aware of a fiendishly voluptuous feeling. He felt a stabbing, exhaustingly terrible delight. It often seemed to him as though his heart had melted away. And with terror, he clutched at it. Worn out, desperate, he began trying to recall all the prayers he knew. He went through all the exorcisms against evil spirits and all at once felt somewhat refreshed. He felt that his step was growing slower. The witch's hold upon his back seemed feebler. Thick grass touched him, and now he saw nothing extraordinary in it. The clear crescent moon was shining in the sky. Good, the philosopher Coma thought to himself, and he began repeating the exorcisms almost aloud. At last, quick as lightning, he sprang from under the old woman and in his turn leaped on her back. The old woman, with a tiny tripping step, ran so fast that her rider could scarcely breathe. The earth flashed by under him. Everything was clear in the moonlight, though the moon was not full. The ground was smooth, but everything flashed by so rapidly that it was confused and indistinct. He snatched up a piece of wood that lay on the road and began whacking the old woman with all his might. She uttered wild howls. At first they were angry and menacing. Then they grew fainter, sweeter, clearer, then rang out gently like delicate silver bells that went straight to his heart. And the thought flashed through his mind, was it really an old woman? Oh, I can do no more, she murmured, and sank exhausted on the ground. He stood up and looked into her face. There was the glow of sunrise, and the golden domes of the Kiev churches were gleaming in the distance. Before him lay a beautiful girl, with luxuriant tresses all in disorder, and eyelashes as long as arrows. Senseless, she tossed her bare white arms and moaned, looking upward with eyes full of tears.